Hello, in this video I'm going to talk about the borders of Afghanistan. I'll focus mainly on the contemporary history, basically from the time the new Afghanistan was established and founded by Ahmad Shah Abdali. Afghanistan existed in this land but with different names and with a different geography. Today what we see in the map is basically what Ahmad Shah Abdali had this land and what his kids inherited from generation to generation and what we have today. So I'm going to talk about that. There will be few maps that we can see from every time, and then we will see the final result, what we have, and which countries are neighboring Afghanistan. This is the map that includes some part of Iran, like you can see it here, and we are bordered with Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. So at that time, this was all like Bukhara and like they were one country. They were not separate countries at that time. And then here on the eastern part, just a very small area is linked with China. Uh, and then on a southern part, we were bordered with India. Pakistan didn't exist at that time. And on the west side, we had a major border with Iran, and then we had a direct way to the um, ocean. Uh, and this was one of the most important thing in the recent history of Afghanistan that we had direct path to the ocean, and uh, this was the time when the British Empire was just increasing around the world, and they were uh, new in India. The company was just working there and increasing its land. And then this is the land that his son Abdurrahman Khan inherited from Ahmad Shah Abdali. In this part, as you can see, we lost most of the land to India, or I can say basically to the British Empire because India was not independent at that time, uh, and Pakistan still didn't exist. We still had way to the ocean. But this was the time that the Russians were conquering most of the northern neighbors of Afghanistan. They conquered Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, all of those northern areas they were conquered. So Afghanistan was between the Russians and the British, and there was a fear by the British and the Europeans that if the Russians conquer Afghanistan, then there's a major chance that they can get access to the hot water and Russians can even go further. So one of the best way was to have demarcation, and most of the official demarcation that we have today in Afghanistan is during that British era that they invaded Afghanistan during different times, and they had those contracts or agreements with Russia, China, and also the Persian Empire of that time. As you can see here, our border on the west side is with Iran, so that's one of the major area. We had three major demarcation area and contract. So as you can see here, we had the first one, and then we had the second one here at the last part of it, and then in the middle we have the third one. All of these happened between 1872 to 1935. Uh, the overall area, the length of this border with Iran is 572 miles or 921 kilometers. Uh, there is like overall, I think what the British did to Afghanistan, they always divided either the resources between the countries to leave a conflict for the country for always, or they divided the people. So here with Iran, what they did, it was basically dividing the water. So as you can see here, we have a major conflict even today, that the water that is coming from Afghanistan, it was going directly here. So instead of dividing the land and drawing here a direct line in this area, they drew a line that the water is coming from Afghanistan land and it is going here to this. place where the water is collected, and then that area is given to Iran. And even today, there's a conflict with that. In future, as people say that water will be the gold of future, and that can increase even further diplomatic and even military problems within the region. And now talking about our north, one of the northern uh, borders, it is with Turkmenistan. The demarcation happened between 1885 to 1888. This was again with between the Russians and the British Empire when they were in Afghanistan, and they had major influence on the kings of that time. And they signed those agreements on demarcation with all of these northern countries. The area, the total length of this border with Turkmenistan is 462 mile or 744 kilometers. The next border that we have is with Uzbekistan, and this is not like very long, but it's still large enough that we can have a transit pass with Uzbekistan is 144 kilometer or 89 miles. The demarcation happened at the same time like Turkmenistan between 1885 to 1888. Uh, this is also an agreement between the Russians and the British Empire. And then we have another major border, which is 1,357 kilometers. This border is with Tajikistan, our other northeastern neighbor on the north side. This is also a landlocked country. It's connected to Afghanistan. One of the major things that happened here with them is basically water between us. So water is dividing the country between these two nations. There are some similarities between the Tajiks living in Tajikistan and the Tajiks in people living in Afghanistan, especially in the bordering provinces of Badakhshan. The demarcation happened between 1884 to 1887, and it technically happened again between these two big partners, Russians and British. Then we have border with China. The border is not so like very big, but it's still big enough that we can do trade, and we can use this as a strategic area for mainly for improving our strategic relation and improving trade with China and the rest of the world, mainly through the Silk Route initiative. This area is uh, also the demarcation happened between 1895 to 1963. So initially, what the British did there, they thought that the demarcation that was done in 1895 it was final, but the Chinese didn't agree with that. And then in 1963, they officially signed to this 46-mile Afghan-Chinese border. Uh, and if you can see here on the map on the right, this orange area is China. So comparison to Afghanistan is very big, and also the border we have is it's very small. So technically, it's a good linkage, and Afghanistan is located in a good place that it can link China with different parts of the world. Okay, now on the southern border, this is one of the longest borders of Afghanistan that is uh, having with its northern and southern neighbor or Pakistan. The length of this border is 2,670 kilometers, is 1,660 miles. Uh, the border, in some time, we refer to it as a Dural line because Durand was an Englishman. He came from England on behalf of the royal or the empire, and in order to have this division between India and the king of Afghanistan at that time, he took all this land which related to Afghanistan. So most parts of Pakistan, today's Pakistan, which didn't exist at that time, it was part of Afghanistan. And then they put this red demarcation, and this was an agreement for 100 years. That after 100 years, this line will go away, and then people of this line, people on both sides of this line will come together. So now, if you see all over this line from starting from the eastern part and coming even up to Iran back, there are people who are living on both sides. For example, son is living in Kandahar and then father is living in the Pakistan side, or vice versa. There were people who had agriculture in Afghanistan and then their families were there, or or vice versa. So this happened. This was something very bad that happened in the Afghanistan history. It brought that division between the people, and it also limited the access of the land to water. So now, if we see, we don't have access to the Arabian Sea anymore, and then the India was divided into two different, like into like small many countries, including Pakistan, Nepal, and then Bangladesh. And there's also the Kashmir area, which is still in conflict between Pakistan and India. So this line is a curse between Afghanistan and uh, current Pakistan, and it created a problem during the previous under previous president Ashraf Ghani. He proposed one thing, because one of the main reasons that Afghanistan is unstable from Pakistan's side during the past 40 years, Pakistan is intervening directly in Afghanistan affair, and one of the reason is this red line, because the Durand line is something that Pakistan believes that it's an international line and is an official border between these two countries. But when the agreement, the Durand line, expired after 100 years, uh, Afghanistan didn't extend that, and they said, like all different presidents that lived in Afghanistan during their presidency or during their emirate or power, including Taliban and including the Mujahideen, all of them, even though they were supported directly by Pakistan, they still didn't agree to this line as an official border between these two countries. I found most of them, especially the Pashtuns, they believe that areas in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and also in the southern part of this, up to the Arabian Sea, this is a land part of Afghanistan, and Pakistan didn't exist. So technically, this was an agreement between the British Empire and also Afghanistan. So in a sense, if we go back to the history, so this is an agreement between two people uh, that exists today. I think they can legally come and they can talk about this and they can resolve some of the issues to either accept this as a official border between these countries, or to go back to the old agreement and to refresh some of the things in some of the legal requirement. Though Pakistan is not agreeing to uh, some of the standards. For example, at that time, one of the requirement was that people who are living on both side of the line, they do not need a visa. They can easily cross this line, one side and other, because these are families. Families were technically divided by this line. And today, Pakistan is requiring most of the people, not most, but many, except the Taliban, who they train as their war progeny and to create uh, military instability in the area. But other than that, anyone who is crossing to Pakistan, they need visa. They need visa. So this is something that was against this. And in addition, these days they are installing those uh, wires and frames around the border. Uh, uh, that they want to formalize this line and make it an official border. Uh, so I don't know exactly what is uh, the stand from the Afghan government, because even under President Ghani, they were just talking orally. They didn't take any action. The line, the extension of the line just increased and increased and increased. And even during Taliban, there were some small clashes, so we don't know exactly whether it was really done in order to prevent the extension of the line, or to just to do a show off. So, but who knows? The history will tell us. So this is one of the areas that Afghanistan is in a major threat with it, and one of the major reasons that Afghanistan is in trouble like these days. And there's one internal side of it, that people who are speaking other languages other than Pashto, they believe that If the Pashtuns on the other side of the line, on the Pakistan side, if they come together with the Pashtuns in Afghanistan, then their majority will become like 100% because there are over 70 million Pashtuns living on two sides of the line in around the world. If they come together, then there will not be those divisions of 50-50% government and those divisions that were done by some of the countries in Afghanistan context. So they have a major fear. So that's why Pakistan is sometimes on a strong side because they see people here inside Afghanistan that they can use them against the internal politics and they can destabilize the whole infrastructure. So that's why when you don't have unity, it is not easy to defeat your enemy outside the borders because you cannot control your people inside the country. And it's like, I'm sorry, the discussion is going a little outside of the topic, but this was what is happening uh, on the dual line. Now, if we see Afghanistan based on the line that the during draw between Afghanistan and India at that time. So when the British Empire arrived to India, all the ports were conquered by them, and they took all this land. The main purpose was to limit access of the Russians to the hot waters, and they thought Afghanistan is one of the areas that they can limit the movement because of the strategic and the mountainous regions, and it will be very difficult for Russians to easily cross this area. So instead of uh, like working on the whole military side, they went strategically and they had this political division of the country. They established a separate barrier and to avoid their expansion to other countries. And there is one assumption that if you see here the Kashmir area, this is the conflicted area between Pakistan and India. So India had removed the part of the Kashmir that was under conflict and under their control. Now there is no free or liberal area of Kashmir under India. It's part of Indian land. But then on Pakistan side, this is Kashmir. It is not completely controlled by Pakistan, but also is not allowed to other countries. So it's not an independent land. There is one assumption that if this part of the Kashmir, which is now close to Pakistan, if this is also conquered by India, then India will be also a neighboring country to Afghanistan. In a sense, that would be something good because Afghanistan would not need to use Pakistan for many trade deals or for things that are strategic for the country, and it will have one more neighbor. I think that can be useful. And at the same time, if we see the map, uh, uh, the Durand, which Durand like damage, if that line expires and they actually grab to that situation and they understand what was there in the line, we will have back access to ocean, and I think that will be something strategic that can happen to the country, which I think is a little imaginary, but we are hopeful. This is another map of Afghanistan. So once upon a time, this was USSR or Russia. All this red area, Afghanistan was in such situation that uh, the northern part was all Russia, so that there was like very limited chance that the Russians could not increase its power to the rest of the world from this strategic location, especially if it reached to the hot waters. Now, if we see in summary, all the neighbors of Afghanistan, so on the west side we see Iran, on the northern side we see Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. On the eastern side, there's only like a 41 kilometer or 46-kilometer area with China. And then we have Pakistan on the south. And then under one assumption, uh, that this is a map potentially drawn by Indians, that we can have direct link with India and border with India on the eastern part. And then this map, you can see the red line. So this is the Dural line, and here you can see the two parts of Kashmir. So part of Kashmir controlled by India and part of Kashmir controlled by Pakistan. So if this Kashmir becomes an independent country, or if it's controlled by India, like all of the Kashmir area, then Afghanistan will have a border with a different country. So now we have border with six country. At that time, we will have border with seven countries, and that can be potentially useful. This was all about the maps that I found for you, and I hope this will be useful information and you can use it. Thank you very much.